Hi there, this is Chrissy Tobis for Spectrum Noir, and today I'm going to show you how to combine aqua markers to create custom backgrounds with stencils. We're going to make this card right here. It's very easy to do. So first I have a Sheena stencil. You can see it right there. I've protected my surface, and now I have a piece of watercolor cardstock. This is a Spectrum Noir watercolor cardstock. I'm securing it down onto my surface. Again, it's protected. You want to make sure that you're not using a surface that can get stained because we are going to be using the watercolor markers as watercolors. So you just want to make sure that it's not going to ruin anything. So you have the option of, after securing down the piece of cardstock, which by the way is cut to 3 3/4 by 5. So once you have secured that piece down with washi tape and then the stencil over it, you can use a watercolor brush, like a water brush, or you can use a regular brush with water, which is what I'm doing here. So I just scribbled some of the marker onto a plain acrylic black. I'm using the aquamarine, and you can see I'm just taking my paintbrush, kind of dipping it in the water first and then grabbing color. I just grab a little bit of color on the tip of my brush, and then I want it to be dark at the top and then lighter at the bottom. So I let the color run out. You can see I grab it, I always start at the top and then I kind of go down. If you feel like it's too saturated, you have too much color, go ahead, you can add more water. If you feel like you want it a lot more saturated, you can take the marker and put it directly onto the cardstock. So you have a couple different options here. I just kind of want it to be soft and flowy. I didn't want anything to be too harsh. I definitely wanted that nice watercolor look. So you can see I'm going in with my heat gun too, and then kind of going back in. That gives a couple different layers of color. It's all the same aquamarine, but you can kind of see it dried, and then I went back over it. And now I'm just doing the same thing, but I'm flicking my brush, so I have just a couple little splatter marks. This would work with a water brush as well. You could use any type of brush that you want. The bigger the brush, the bigger the specks are going to be. So keep that in mind. So now on a separate piece of the watercolor cardstock, I am going to go and I'm going to stamp this cute little coffee cup on there. I'm just using some VersaFine black onyx ink, and then I'm going to cover that with some clear embossing powder. The reason why I'm doing that is I am going to be adding a lot of water to this, and I'm also going to be using sparkle markers, and both of those could potentially cause the ink to bleed. I don't think that it will, but I didn't want to take any chances. So I activated it with the heat gun. I did that off camera. I'll show you a little bit later in this video how to use a heat gun if you are not familiar with it. And then I started coloring. So I'm using the chocolate aqua marker, and I'm going to use the slate for the whipped cream. And then I'm also going to use that same aquamarine that I use for the background for the straw. So I'm keeping it very simple. I just have 3 basic colors. So you can see I started out with like a light brown, and now I'm just kind of going in and picking up the color. This time I'm using a water brush. I wanted to show how to use a water brush and how to use a paintbrush. If you don't have a water brush, you can most certainly use a paintbrush for this as well. For me, it's just a little bit easier to have the water right there. I'm not having to dip all the time. So now I'm going in with the crystal clear sparkle marker on the top. And then I decided that I wanted to use the smoked quartz, which is like a brownish, and to really get some like nice dark shadows. And I also went in into the whipped cream area where I had used the slate aqua marker. I used just a real little bit of the sterling silver sparkle marker. So what's great about this is you can still blend them with water. You can see I'm using my water brush, but I'm using the sparkle markers. They blend really well, and they coordinate really well with all of the other Spectrum Noir products. So whether you're using the Illustrator markers, the regular markers, the aqua markers, the pencils, the watercolor pencils, whatever, everything coordinates together. Everything matches really well. So I just trimmed this little piece out. I sped this up pretty fast. I really don't cut this fast. And then because I didn't leave any type of a border, I had to fix a couple of areas. I just wanted to show how to do that. I just take a plain old black marker, and I just kind of very carefully go in and add some of the black to emulate what I would have stamped. Some of it got cut off a little bit by mistake. I was just a little too close with my scissors. So this is a great way to fix anything that you've maybe fussy cut out and kind of screwed up. You don't have to restamp it and start all over again. You can fix it with a black marker. So I'm going to go and I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment again. I didn't have to use the clear embossing powder this time, but I wanted to because it kind of pops up a little bit. And you can see that before I stamped, I put something on the cardstock there. That's just some powder. Some people will call it like a chalk pouch. That's just for the embossing, so when I do emboss, the extra little bits of that powder doesn't stick. So to finish up my background, I have this awesome watercolor, and then I decided I actually wanted to add a little bit more to it, just give it a little bit more interest, but I didn't want it to be too obvious. So I grabbed a little stamp, it says coffee on it, but it looks like Elements. It's from the same stamp set. And I stamped it in some gray ink, but then I did what's called the stamp off technique. So I stamped it on a scrap piece of paper. So when I'm actually stamping on my panel, it's a little bit lighter than what the normal ink would be. So that just gives a little bit of interest in the back of the card, but it's not really obvious. So I'm now just assembling my card. I'm using some 3D foam squares. I did it for the panel that we created the background on, and I also trimmed a piece of 5 1/4 by 4 black pearl shimmering cardstock, kind of like as my mat, and I adhered that on with foam squares as well. And now I'm also putting the little coffee cup on there. So I hope you will give this technique a try, creating your own backgrounds. Get more tutorials and videos for Spectrum Noir at spectrumnoir.com. Thanks, have a great day.